So in this question, we're told that a company sells bags of plant food for P euros. Now, I'm going to say that P euros, just for the sake of demonstration, is 100 euros. And we'll go and we'll do the question properly with the letters P and R in a minute. But just for now, let's assign values to it. So here's a bag of plant food that the company sells, and it's 100 euros. We want to see, would it be cheaper to reduce the price of this bag of plant food by 10% and then take off a further amount, R, and for the purpose of this question, I'm going to say R is a nice number, let's say 50 euros. So would it be cheaper to reduce the bag by 10% and then take off a further 50 euros? Or would it be cheaper to reduce the price, 100 euros, by R euros, so take off the 50 euros first, and then reduce that new figure by 10%. And that's all they're asking. And which of those options, option 1 or 2, would be cheaper? And whatever the answer is for these numbers, that would also be the answer when we put in the P's and R's and do the question that way. One of the conditions in the question is that R, the number amount that you're going to take off, either after you reduce it by 10% or before you reduce it by 10%, it has to be between 0, it has to be bigger than 0, and less than 0.9p. It has to be less than 90% of whatever p is. P in our example is 100 euros. It has to be less than 90% of 100 euros, which is 90 euros. And it is. We've picked a number that's between 0 and 90. Okay, so let's have a look and see what the options tell us to do. So the first one, let's write down, we'll have blue for option 1. So option 1 says that we're going to take the price, the usual price, and reduce it by 10%. So we're going to take the usual price, which is 100, and we're going to subtract 10% of 100. So let's write that as 0.1 times 100. Now we know that 10% of 100 is going to be 10 euros. And then it says reduce that by a further R, and in our case, R is 50. So then we're going to subtract another 50. Okay, so that's going to be 100 minus 10% of 100 is 10 euros, and then we're going to subtract another 50. And so the new price is 40 euros. So if we take off a percentage and then reduce it by another number amount, we get 40 euros. Okay, let's have a look at option 2. So in option 2, what we're going to do is we are going to take the usual price and reduce it by R. Okay, well that's pretty easy. We're going to take 100 euros and we're going to take off R, which in our case is 50 euros. So 100 minus 50. And then this new price, we're going to reduce it by another 10%. So the new price is clearly 50. 100 minus 50 is 50. And we're going to take off 10% of 50. Now, I'm going to write it as 10% of 100 minus 50, whatever the new price is. The new price is 50. 10% of 50, we're going to subtract. Okay, so 100 minus 50 is 50. And then minus 10% of 50. 10% of 50 is 5. And we get 45 euros. So we can clearly see in our example here that option 1 is cheaper. If you first take off the 10% and then reduce it by the amount R, that seems to be cheaper than subtracting the amount R first and then reducing that new figure by 10%. Now, to do it with P's and R's, which is what the question actually wants us to do, and we'll try and get an understanding of what it means. So option 1, remember, was taking the usual price, which was 50, minusing 10% of that, so reducing it by 10%, so 0.1 of P, and then minusing whatever the amount R is. Now, we can tidy this up and say that P minus 0.1P, that's 0.9P, and then minus R. So option 1 is basically getting 90% of the original price, or the usual price, and subtracting R. Option 2 then says, well, the usual price is going to be reduced by R, so that's P minus R. And then from that, we're going to subtract 10% of that new price. So not 10% of the original price, not 10% of P, but 10% of the new price. The new price is P minus R. So we're going to subtract R from P, that's the new price, minus 10% of that price. So if we multiply out the brackets, we get P minus R, minus 0.1p, and then plus 0.1r. P minus 0.1p is 0.9p, and then minus r plus 0.1r is minus 0.9r. Now, you might be looking at these two numbers and saying, well, like, it's kind of hard to tell which of these is cheaper. Well, not really. If we think of 0.9p, that's 90% of the usual price. They both have that. And then in option 1, you're subtracting a full R, whatever R is, the amount that we're taking away. You're subtracting that in option 1. But in option 2, you only end up subtracting 90% of that, 0.9R. So if you subtract R from 90% of P, that's going to be a smaller amount than if you had subtracted 0.9R or 90% of R from 90% of P. So whatever way we break it down, we can see that 0.9p minus R is a smaller number than 0.9p minus 0.9R, because subtracting R from something is going to be a greater reduction than subtracting 0.9R of something. So the answer is option 1.